right? There's a lot of people that have a lot of trauma and have been strung out on, opioids, fentanyl, for example. They've been in and out of treatment. They've been on a lot of medications for support. And it seems like in some circles, recovery was always measured by you're either abstinent or you're not, very pass fail, right? And it lent itself to a lot of alternative approaches, for example, harm reduction, where people...
Hi, and welcome to The Holistic Entrepreneur, where we explore innovative approaches to healthcare through conversations with pioneering practitioners. I'm your host, Zane Myers. Let's dive into today's episode. Here we are for another episode of The Holistic Entrepreneur, and we're very happy to have Dr. David Wiss, not going to pronounce that last name wrong, with us. And let me read this because I want to get this all in. He's a cutting-edge nutritionist and thought leader in the intersection of food and mental health and addiction recovery. He's the founder of Nutrition in Recovery and creator of Wise Mind Nutrition, a digital platform that helps people heal their relationship with food through science-backed, compassionate guidance. And so that's really a unique take on eating. So one of the things that jumped out at me, I'm going to go right into the middle of, I said I would go all over the place with my questions. And one of the things that jumped out at me as I was going through your information was the idea of food neutrality, hunger neutrality, and the idea of never eating to be full and never being hungry. So talk about that, because that's just an interesting concept. Can you just speak to that right out of the blocks?
Yeah, I'm glad you found that term. It's a very useful goal for people that are on a mental health recovery path. I think it's probably safe to say that many mental health challenges are characterized by extremes. So if you think about addiction, right, there's extreme highs and extreme lows, and other mental health have emotional extremes where people swing across these continuums. And I think the same thing is true with eating. There are a lot of people who trend toward skipping food all day and then having one large meal at night. And that could work really great for one person, but for the next person, it's just recreating neurochemical extremes. So if you try to look at the intersection of nutrition and mental health, you would think about how can we use food to help heal the brain, right? And obviously we have nutrients that are important for brain health, blood glucose. I mean, I could go on, but the concept of food neutrality is basically suggesting that consistency with food can lead to consistency with life, and that there are a lot of people that are just inconsistent in their daily actions and behaviors, and that if we could do nutrition interventions that would stabilize that, maybe that could spill over to some other areas of their life.
So do you see food as, I'm not even looking at my list, my list of questions. So do you see food as intricately linked to your mental health? Is that?
I think it's probably safe to say that that's going to be more true for some people than others, right? Some people have mental health challenges that are rooted in genetic legacies and trauma, and they might have decent nutrition. And so that person might not be hyper responsive to a nutrition intervention, but we're seeing more and more people who have mood disorders, anxiety, have addictions, and are not getting better from therapy and from psychiatric intervention. So those are the folks who are most responsive to what we call nutrition and lifestyle interventions. And it's making an impact.
So I see in my own family, I have a sibling who, I wouldn't say she's, grossly overweight, but I guess if you measured her on the standards of, I'm sure she's not going to watch this because she'd be angry if she heard this. But if you measured her on the standards of what would be BMIs on the scale, then she would be considered obese. But in today's society, in America, there's so many people that fall into that category of obese. And then I have, other siblings in my family who don't have that problem at
Sure.
all.
Sure.
So, how do you deal with this? So some of it is obviously familial, but some of it is all in your head and the habits that you've. So how do you make a diagnosis, or do you make a diagnosis?
Sure.
Is that
in functional medicine? One of the primary things that we do is conceptualize a timeline, and this goes back before conception, even before birth. We're thinking about all the upstream antecedents that could contribute to someone's health. So you already said it, genetic predisposition. It is very likely that, for example, one sibling can pick up some genetic vulnerabilities that other siblings don't pick up on. And usually genes aren't deterministic. And so when you combine genetic vulnerability with some early life exposures, it could be the difference between, C-section and vaginal delivery, or we're seeing the importance of, duration of breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, antibiotic use during early life, food preferences. I think it's safe to say that by the time someone is even 5 years old, that we have pretty good predictive capacity on metabolism and other markers of BMI, etc. So we live in a society where everyone just assumes that body weight is a choice and it's a matter of moving your body and eating differently, but the science shows otherwise. And so I think if you compound all those risk factors that I mentioned with feeling separate and alone, a lot of people that grew up in larger bodies were teased or didn't feel great about their social dynamics. And it all comes together to create situations where there is metabolic dysfunction, emotional eating, mental health challenges. And this is holistic health. This is looking at the entire picture, not just biomarkers, but looking at someone's social and cultural upbringings and environments and their brain chemistry and their gut bacteria, and bringing it all together to understand how these systems work either in harmony or out of harmony.
So tell me something about your practice that runs contrary to commonly held beliefs.
Yeah. So I've never had any kind of focus on calories or macronutrients. And it's not to say that I don't think that they're important, but a lot of the nutrition frameworks out there are based on those. You think about sports nutrition. And by the way, I came up like in the fitness world. I was a personal trainer when I went to graduate school for nutrition to become a dietitian, etc. So I'm very well versed in that space. But as soon as I started a private practice and started providing group education, I learned that most people were expecting me to talk that way. I have a certain look, and like they're ready and they want to know, and people are primed for math-centric nutrition. And I think that one of my visions very early on from my first business, Nutrition and Recovery, was to talk about nutrition in a way that people had never heard before. So starting to talk about the qualitative aspects of food, the phytonutrients, the colors, the fibers, and really to get people excited about health in a way that wasn't solely focused on vanity, that it was also focused on sanity, mental health, gut health, etc. And so, I've always talked about macro issues in the nutrition space, conflicts of interest in nutrition research.
So tell me, I want to talk about that, conflicts of interest in nutrition research, because I just saw, so I talked to another functional health physician who I know pretty well, and he was talking about phytates and the negative effect of phytates on your ability to absorb certain nutrients into your body. And then I said, I'm curious. I want to go research this on my own.
Yeah.
Because I know he has his opinion and it's a strong one. But then I went out and I started reading online, and then I started
and then I looked for the source, and it says according to the National Grain Society or something like that. And I thought, where do you find reliable information? Because it was like, phytates do block your ability to absorb iron, and there was one other main nutrient, but they have all these other benefits. And I thought, well, I don't know what it's from the grain, a grain
association
group.
Yeah. So they're defending their products, which is right. I think the overall trend, right? Like, phytates as being an anti-nutrient has its pros and its cons, right? And I think if I were to characterize industry-funded research, it's along the lines of what you're pointing to, which is that most of it's designed to bring people to the conclusion of there's nothing wrong here, this is safe, right? It's kind of business as usual. We tested, when I was in school, they were testing, corn syrup versus regular sugar, and, these industrial oils versus olive oil. And I think depending on what you measure and what you look at, you can come to some very different conclusions. And the pattern that I saw as I was in grad school and starting to read scientific literature was that you would see a lot of independent researchers with, minimally funded studies come together and say, hey, there's something ado here about these ultra processed foods or these refined oils or these food additives. There's a problem that we're noticing, and that food companies would just go ahead and fund a few studies that would show that they are safe, right? So that it could continue, and that it would basically plant doubt. And the genius is that when they have such deep pockets, they could fund more studies than exist on the contrary. And then
they can market those studies. That's the big thing, is they have the marketing power to get the word out there.
That's right.
in the marketplace that our studies are better than yours.
Yeah, and they have ways of hiring scientists to criticize the scientific muster of the other studies. They'll do a systematic review and say there's no association, there's no story here. And then we just continue to move on in a private profit over public health type of a world.
How do you get to the truth?
Well, when we think about the concept of evidence-based medicine, right? It really is three different legs of evidence-based medicine. It's not just papers that were published. There's obviously the evidence base, the scientific literature, and there's also clinical expertise, people that are in the field, right? You can't just say people that rely on anecdote and clinical expertise but don't read the scientific literature is not a good look. But people that just look at papers, like this is oftentimes the criticism of academics, but aren't like actually talking to doctors and practitioners in the field, that's a problem as well. So a real evidence-based medicine approach combines published literature with clinical expertise with patient preference. You need all three. And there are times when we're able to have more in one area than in the others. For example, my research has been on food addiction, ultra processed food addiction. And, it's been around as a construct for decades. There are tons of people seeking help for it. There are experts in the world who treat this in very different ways. Not everyone uses the same approach. And there's growing scientific literature. So we have an evidence base there of publications, practitioners, and patients all coming together to say, hey, there's something going on here. And
so let me ask you about that specifically, because it's getting my curiosity. I haven't even went to my 40 questions that I wrote out yet. About the idea of ultra processed food addiction. And I do know that, you can sit down in front of a bag of chips or some other type of product and just, it's easy enough to just sit there and watch the TV and consume the whole bag. So, I mean, it happens to every day. I mean, the food companies depend on it. So are they doing something to the foods that encourage that?
In fact, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to do something to the food to encourage that. The whole game is profit maximization. And they have a lot of research laboratories where they can, engineer food for maximum hedonic response. Sometimes maybe you've heard the term the bliss point, the exact amount of sugar or salt that lights up the brain. And it's very obvious in, a lot of different commodity industries and even just, marketing in general. Whatever elicits the most neurochemical response, favorable neurochemical response, or at least perceived to be favorable, the most dopamine in this case, they're going to sell more. And so the whole name of the game in corporate packaged food products is to make it tastier, cravier, snackier, crunchier, saltier, colorful. That is how you win in that game. And if a company's not doing that, they're not actually doing what their investors have asked them to do. And so it's this huge conundrum where our system in the US is set up for, at that level, profit maximization. And when that happens at the expense of public health, it's a real bummer. And that's where, now we're in the situation where it's like, people have to step in. The government has to step in, right?
So let me ask you a very pragmatic kind of question. So I come to you and I say, I'm overweight. I feel like I'm fat. I can't control my eating. I don't know what to do. I have been kind of bouncing up and down in this range. Sometimes I get thinner, but I'm really never in control of my weight. What do I do?
Yeah. So in a situation like that, I, as a mental health scientist and, someone that provides individual level counseling and care, I'm in a position to provide psychoeducation about the interaction between food and the brain, and then the interaction between the brain and the mind. I think it's probably safe to say that most people have a set of assumptions about that problem, and some of them could be misguided. A lot of people will say, I just eat more than I want, and I want to lose weight, and I know what I got to do, right? Most people aren't missing out on information, right? We live in the era of artificial intelligence. Like, anyone could get a meal plan generated in seconds. You don't need a doctor to tell you how many calories you need to eat or what a good macro breakdown. Like, we have all the technology to do that in the world. People need to be heard, to feel understood, and to be educated on their unique situation. So I might be able to describe how food influences our biology, starting, at the mouth, the gut, the brain, how food can be rewarding, what aspects of food are rewarding, and how that might, really alter the brain in terms of creating a priority list, right? A lot of people eat food against their desires, right? They eat certain types of food after they've had negative consequences. There's a lot going on underneath the hood, I call it. And that's the psychology of eating. And this is the type of work that I get to do with people, is reorient their assumptions about what's going on, provide new data, new science about their challenges, and then basically co-create a roadmap for moving forward. And that could be very structured. It could also be very loose, very rigid, and very much based on what I call guiding principles.
So give me an example of maybe both ends of that spectrum. Maybe, and if you can think of a specific patient, obviously without discussing their name, but or a specific instance where you were able to help someone with either one end of that spectrum or the other.
I'll probably talk broadly to not double click on anyone's personal story. I've treated over 1,000 people. And an example intervention, right? would be something along the lines of, let's start with, how many times do you want to eat per day? Just meal timing. What time do you go to sleep? What time do you wake up, right? And getting a sense of what someone's relationship with food is like in the morning. We have a lot of people that don't eat breakfast because they learned that it's good to fast, and then they might be, binge eating at night or having mood swings throughout the day. That approach could work great for one person and, again, be contraindicated for the next. So I might say, let's aim to have something within an hour of waking up, especially if they're on some supplements or some medications, pairing some sort of a breakfast strategy. And then, so starting with when to eat, building out like roughly there's going to be 3 meals and 1 snack. And this is roughly when I eat, give or take, right? Maybe there's a principle of I don't go more than 5 hours without eating. That's something that probably makes sense for most people when they're awake, right? There's different approaches out there for sure. And people like eating 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day. It's not my preference, and it's generally not what I recommend. Okay. And then thinking about what to eat. And then it's like just focusing on eating real food. So instead of saying, I want you to eat 3/4 of a cup of this, I might say something like, I want to see you get all colors of the rainbow in the course of an entire day. That there's going to be yellow, orange, there's going to be dark green, there's going to be red, there's going to be blue, purple. We're going to get all the colors. And then I want at least a color at every meal. I might add some additional principles, like there should be either an animal protein, a dairy, or a bean, nut, and seed. And just giving people principles by which they can start to live their life. And generally, and I could go on and on about other factors, how to eat, mindful eating, soulful eating, cooking, cleaning, all the different parts of my Wise Mind Nutrition framework. But it's generally wise to just start with a few things on the first meeting. Let's just switch out the artificial sweetened beverages. Let's drink water. Let's drink a bottle of chia seed water, and let's get you in a meal timing strategy. Let's just start there. And then next step, we come back and add more interventions. And, the cool part is, this is the kind of work I've done for many, many years, individualizing treatment and care with people, and finally built it all into a mobile app so that people that can't afford to meet with a doctor every week could get a similar type of a journey, all delivered through their device.
So that was what the next thing one of the questions I had on here. Wise Mind Nutrition is an app-based program. You're kind of answering that. And what prompted you to create an app and curriculum like this? And how does that fit in with your current work and recovery?
I think that I was very focused in the first, 8 or 9 years of my career on specifically substance use disorder and addictions, food addiction, and eating disorders, binge eating, bulimia, and the intersection between those two. That's like where I get people reaching out from other countries, right? I do that substance use disorder, eating disorder combo work, and it's a pretty common co-occurrance. I did notice after many years of clinical practice that there was, of course, a lot of trauma, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and other issues that are comorbid and need some attention as well. So started building protocols for other mental health diagnoses, and I just broadened from, focusing on recovery, nutrition, addiction, eating disorders to the broader mental health field, which is where Wise Mind Nutrition was birthed. That anyone who's on a mental health journey should probably give some attention to their food, to their sleep, to their water, to their sunlight. And I wanted to create a place where people could come, get supported, get educated, and make sure that it was safe and that it wasn't like a particular Dr. Wiss diet that I was pushing on people. Because, that is sexy. That's what people like. People want something that's very specific Wise Mind Nutrition is more of an educational journey that asks people to go inside, to not like completely outsource their thinking to me or to someone else, but like to really do some digging. Ask yourself about your barriers to cooking, to think about the role of body image in your relationship with food. So it's built to be a more spiritual in nature journey than like a math centric metabolic type of journey. And I built it because I get a lot of calls from people, and one of the most common questions that people ask me is, do you take insurance?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is no, I don't, but I can provide you with the super bill. And the amount of people that got that answer from me and weren't able to move forward really stimulated me to say, I need to have an option for these people.
Some other mechanism that was more affordable.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So you've also written about overcoming your own substance use struggles. Can you talk about that? Is that okay? Is that somewhere you want to go?
People always ask me about that. I think once I've shared juicy parts of my story, yeah, it's out there. When I was in my undergrad, early 20s, I struggled. This was the late 90s, early 2000s, the first wave of the quote unquote opioid crises, when a lot of those pharmaceutical opioids were just flooding the street, and innocent, well-intentioned youngsters that were just trying to have a good time, or before we know it, we're taking Oxycontin 80s and, doing all the high-risk behaviors associated with that. So I had a pretty gnarly rave culture, drug culture story that ended up in some health challenges and some social consequences, even some legal challenges. And it was a definite tough time for me, age 24. And, one of the reasons that I pivoted to become a dietitian and a mental health nutritionist was because when I hit the reset button and started my life over at age 24, nutrition was a huge part of it. It was absolutely the thing that made me feel different quickly. The combination of basically, everything you would expect: sunlight, water, the weight training, the high protein, the colorful foods. I mean, I had a rapid transformation, the kind that everyone I think wishes they had, of like, one day things are going to just start to become different. They become so markedly different, and it keeps going. Everyone notices it, starts asking for help. And then pretty soon I have a career trajectory in front of me, And
so all that really directed you into so when you were 24 years old, had you already started down this journey towards nutrition before, or did you have a metamorphosis at that point?
Yeah. No, I actually took a nutrition class when I was in undergrad, and I dropped it. Just to give full context, I couldn't hang. You know why I dropped it? Is because the class assignment was like counting calories and tracking your food and doing math and weighing yourself. And I wasn't into that at the time. It didn't tickle my.
It doesn't sound like you're into it now either. That idea of counting calories and.
Well, I'm not, but I also think that to go back to some of the food company stuff, the conflicts of interest, I think that that's what they want. I think the food companies want all of us to be focused on calories and macros rather than on ingredients. I really do. I think that's one of their biggest hustles, so that they can sell diet products and continue to sell packaged foods, and to trick people into basically, counting and internalizing this idea of personal responsibility, that it's my choice. I know how to count. If I want to make changes, I just have to count calories. If I fail, it's because I didn't try hard enough. I think that's the playbook, is to focus on math and to get people feeling like it's their own responsibility. And I'm not saying it's not, but they use that as a tactic to move attention from their unscrupulous practices.
How do you support someone who, now I'm actually going back to some of my original questions. How do you support someone who feels guilty or shameful after eating something they thought was off limits?
It's obviously going to depend on that person's psychological profile. I know that's not a good answer. You know, people have internalized guilt, shame, and remorse around food. And it's often important to get to the understanding of where it came from. Sometimes people get this voice from their parents growing up, or maybe it was an aunt or a grandma, right? Maybe they were in a relationship with someone who made comments about their body. Maybe it was a well-intentioned personal trainer or a nutritionist, right, along the way, who was just trying to help. And so it's important to understand when people over-internalize negative emotions, to understand where they came from. And when people experiencing them, really asking the question, is this a current experience, or is this more of a relic of yesteryear? Is this echoing from old trauma, basically? And I found that to be super, super helpful for some people, because, sometimes things, experiences are very sticky over our life, you know?
So how do you help people, or what are some mechanisms that you use to help people who have strong hunger or fullness signals, that they are really hungry and they don't stop until I get that complete fullness?
Yeah.
How do you help them?
Yeah, those are when high volume type of interventions make sense. So high fiber, high water content type of foods. I'm talking about, and I have that a little bit.
You mean personally you have that?
I have appetite, you know what I mean? And I wouldn't call it ravenous, but there were times when I was like in my bodybuilding phase, in my late 20s, when I want to eat, and one of the things that I discovered, and many people have found this as well, is like, if you make like, huge salads that are high in fat, high in fiber, high in protein, you can actually reach a satiety based on, fiber and volume that you probably couldn't reach through more traditional refined foods. So some people.
So that's kind of interesting to me. My wife, she likes salads that are, I don't know, I consider them full of fluff. Just a bunch of different types of lettuce. And to me, I get up and I just want to go get something out of the refrigerator. I like salads that have all kinds of stuff in them. That are, because then I don't know, it's almost like a meal in the salad.
It is.
I mean,
putting in mulberries and pumpkin seeds and feta cheese and sauerkrauts, like nutrient dense, calorie dense foods in a big salad, and having that be a meal that takes 20 minutes to eat. By the way, that's the other thing about some of these like fork and knife foods. They take more time to chew rather than handheld food. So that approach has worked for a lot of people. Other people need to just focus on slowing down and eating at a much slower rate, chewing their food to full, like a paste, rather than anything chunky, and putting the fork and the knife down between bites, that sort of thing.
I'm guilty of that. I plead guilty.
Right on.
I've been accused of, inhaling my foods from times to time. We get so busy in our lives, and then you go out and it's time for dinner. It's time for the next meal, and you may not have everything in the refrigerator. You haven't planned, so you go out. Where's someplace that's nearby? Let's go get something to eat. Typically, that happens to a large percentage of the population. Is there better places to go than other places?
I think if someone is very willful and creative and resourceful, that one can create a very balanced meal at most establishments. I try to tell my patients, like, I can walk up to a taco truck and tell them to make me a bed of their lettuce, and what if they have some fajita vegetables, and put on whatever beans they got, give me their meat, put some avocado on there, and I'll use the salsa bar, and put on some jalapenos, some pico de gallo, and some cilantro, and I'll have like a really awesome meal that wasn't on their menu. So people have to be willing to, speak up to get their needs met. I could walk into any restaurant and combine certain things, and sometimes they give you that look of like, no, do you want number 1 through 10? And I'm like, they're like, oh, the avocado's extra, and I'm like, that's fine, I have, please help me meet my needs. You know what I mean?
How about dairy? What, like sour cream? You started to describe all that, and I thought, oh, I want some sour cream on there. So how do you feel about dairy?
I've always been a fan of dairy and defended it when everyone turned against it. It's back. Everyone's back to dairy again. I've never been going with the trends. I've always believed in full fat, unsweetened, dairy products. And I do favor the ones that have more protein. If you think about, ricotta cheese and, mozzarella cheese, kefirs, that sort of thing. But I would probably make the argument that, especially on Mexican food, steak, something like, there's very few things that are as tasty as sour cream. So I will endorse your position.
Okay. So, weight stigma. How do you approach the conversations? Because you've done a lot with bulimia and some other things like that. How do you approach the weight stigma and even the self-perception of people's weight, whether they can't see themselves as overweight or they can't see themselves as at the right weight?
Yeah. So this goes back to one of your previous questions about doing, counseling work, challenging people's assumptions. I think a lot of folks have internalized a lot of weight stigma that exists in society and make negative assumptions about themselves that they have sort of confirmed through social norms. And it's a very effective therapeutic strategy to help people disentangle negative feelings that they might actually have about themselves versus ideas and feelings that may have been widespread in society and then internalized. I mean, it's everywhere, weight stigma. And I think there are some people who take it in and really it makes them unwell, and there's other people who don't. And that's when you see people that are living in larger bodies but are confident, and they don't feel like they're buying into all the stuff that society's selling. And I really, really appreciate people that are able to challenge the internalized weight bias and not buy in to all of that.
So on that same area, so I think of somebody like Lizzo, and I really do love the messaging she has on one hand, but on the other hand, we know that people who are grossly overweight live less healthy lives. They have many health issues, and I'm afraid that sometimes that it's almost propagated that this is the way to, don't worry about your weight. Don't worry about what you eat. We celebrate that we're overweight and it is great. When in fact, those people, my son is a podiatrist, they lose their feet, they have diabetes, they have all these other issues. So it's not good to just be overweight. It's kind of it's not that you want to shame them. You obviously shouldn't do that. And I love what Lizzo, did and has done. But on the other side, if you celebrate that too much, you can really fall into a trap there.
Yes. It really depends on, how you're thinking about it. If you're thinking about it from a metabolic health perspective or a mental health perspective, I think that, if someone is quote unquote celebrating it, that's a bold statement that goes against what the social norms say. And I actually think there's some value in a mental health context, because it's not always straightforward for people to to change. This is also true for addictions, right? There's a lot of people that have a lot of trauma and have been strung out on, opioids, fentanyl, for example. They've been in and out of treatment. They've been on a lot of medications for support. And it seems like in some circles, recovery was always measured by you're either abstinent or you're not, very pass fail, right? And it lent itself to a lot of alternative approaches. For example, harm reduction, where people are basically saying, I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm doing better than I used to be. And I feel pretty good about myself. And that creates like a pathway for people to have some healing. And I think the same thing would be true with body weight, is that it's not pass fail. You can't assume that people who live in larger bodies are going to be able to just get their BMI down to 24. It's just not scientifically supported. So to really help people make peace with the life that they have versus spend the rest of their life trying to chase a life that they want is meaningful work. And that's where I think the real value of body positivity comes in.
Okay, I like that answer. So I can't talk to somebody about diet and weight and issues without the topic of Ozempic and that whole class of drugs coming up. And there's many other health benefits other than losing weight that have recently been discovered. But those are all drug company funded studies too. So I look at those a little bit cynically. So do you want to just talk about briefly about Ozempic, good and bad?
Yeah, I think that my initial position when they hit the scene, was definitely a little on the naysayer side, probably because I have a long history of distrust with big pharma. And I'm pretty bummed to see that they get to capitalize on an epidemic that they created, more or less. And so I definitely had some negative views. I have a background in eating disorder treatment. So in that culture, in that field, there's a lot of resistance to a medical intervention to, body weight. And so, yeah, I came in very skeptical. And then, I've been treating people for years now, and I've seen it do things for people's lives that lifestyle counseling, dietary interventions could not do. And I've seen people be very, very pleased with the effects. So I have gone from being anti to being super open-minded and even recommending them to some people. And of course, I see people on them that probably shouldn't be on them quite a bit.
So describe that.
Maybe a woman in her late 20s that has a history of an eating disorder that just feels body dissatisfied and talked her psychiatrist into having, a GLP-1 weekly injection and is now basically malnourishing herself, not eating right, having other mental health challenges, but like finally has the body she's always wanted, right? Low energy, that sort of thing. I've seen quite a bit of that.
You mean becoming less healthy as a result of
That's right.
not getting the proper nutrition?
That's right. I've seen that.
So yeah, that didn't really even occur to me. Yeah, but I do know, particularly, I'll say something. I don't know. I can be accused of being sexist to a certain degree, but there's a larger component sociologically for women to have a certain body type than there is for men. And there's more pressure on them. So I can see how someone who is maybe just a little bit overweight or maybe has been that way their whole life would feel pressure to get on that more so than a man.
Sure. Societal pressure is definitely a thing. And I think that's a statement that one could make, which is very, very sound. And there's probably a lot more men that have body image dissatisfaction and issues there than would care to admit, right?
Yeah. They would care to admit.
Yeah.
So if you could change one common myth about nutrition and mental health in our culture, what would that be?
Yeah, I think I would probably make the argument that it's less about the diagnoses and more about the person. I think we're in an era where people are looking for what's the diet for depression, what's the diet for bipolar, et cetera. And diagnoses are helpful to really understand a person and maybe their neurophysiology. But at the end of the day, people are people. We're individuals. So you need someone like myself who could work collaboratively with the person and see what makes sense in their current life, in their budget, how to make steps in, and then to also never be too attached to any particular way of eating. There's a lot of people that eat a certain way and get some great benefits from it, but find that it's not sustainable. Right. There are people that, do a ketogenic approach, and that could be great. And then fast forward a year later, they're like, I want to eat fruit again, and just being able to move through health with more grace, more open-mindedness, less rigidity, and knowing when to seek counsel and outside help.
So I want you to plug your if I want to find out more about Dr. David Wiss. Yeah. Did I pronounce that Wiss?
Yes, you got it
correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. David Wiss online and about your app. Give me your URLs where we go and find out.
My private practice, my group practice where I do clinical work is called Nutrition in Recovery, and that's nutritioninrecovery.com. The app is called Wise Mind Nutrition, and it's wise as in wisdom. Wise Mind comes from dialectical behavioral therapy.
Is there a hyphen in there?
Nope,
or is it
just wisemindnutrition.com? It's in the Apple Store, Google Play Store, etc. And then my kind of personal brand is drdavidwiss.com, where I have all my published papers, free trainings on mental health and podcasts, all that sort of stuff. So I'm pretty active on social media. Instagram is Dr. David Wiss. I have Wise Mind Nutrition at TikTok as well as YouTube, and I'm pretty responsive to inquiries and comments, etc.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, that about winds it up for today. Thanks for tuning in to The Holistic Entrepreneur. I'm Zane Myers. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our podcast or watch on YouTube. Join us next time as we continue to explore both the art of healing and the science of business in healthcare. We'll see you next time.